today. So, and I know we have Patriots fans in the room, so I want to say good luck to the Patriots and God bless the Broncos. To the kids. I said good luck. I was good there for a minute.
How do we get on that? How do we get on the website?
Well, just YouTube. Just go to YouTube, www.youtube.com, Sherry. Someone can show you.
YouTube.
YouTube, that's right.
That's getting in the back door.
So, or maybe, I don't know which door. Thank you. I'm very excited. This is the first time that I've actually presented anything. I was away for 3.5 months from you. And literally, the day after I got back, a 14-year-old boy had a severe accident on Vail Mountain. Do you remember Zeke Pierce? Zeke Pierce this summer. Literally, that was the beginning. That was the day before I actually came back to church. That was July 9th. And from that day until now, I have not touched my blog. I have not completed anything that they say to complete. I'm embarrassed to tell you I'm hoping to do that and actually turn it into a book. So I'm as interested as anybody about how this turns out. So welcome. This is not a historical study. It's not a geographical exploration. It's not even about theology. We're going to do all of that. But my goal for this time is to come closer to Jesus. And to use Mark's language, to fall in love. I fell in love with Paul. I dated the Lord on this entire experience, and no question, to spend time and stare and gaze. Everything that Mark said, I want to say I'm into. That's why we're really here. If Paul were here, he'd say the exact same thing. I'm convinced. He said, don't worry about me. Think about Jesus. That's what he did with everybody else. So, having said that, I'd like to transport us today. I don't have a bunch of fancy technology to throw up images and so forth, but we can do this well enough. I'd like to transport us into where the action is throughout world history. It's not in North America. Only in the past maybe 50 years has North America, maybe 70, become historically interesting. Here's where the action is. It's all around this body of water called the Mediterranean. When Rome conquered the entire thing, did anybody know what they called it with typical Roman reserve? Mare Nostrum, our sea. You could also say our lake. Romans were so modest. But anyway, Far East, Orient in Latin, Middle East, and Near East. We're in the Middle East. If you're from Britain, it's middle. It's called the Occident. It's called the Fertile Crescent. Some British people call it the Levant. But it's basically this intersection of 3 great land masses. Africa, Asia, and Europe. This is where the action is. It's always where the action. It's always going to be where the action is. This dictates world history and humanity right here. And so, here we have this little section, subsection here. This is where Paul was. And I'd like to take you today back to the 1st century, 2,000 years. AD, if you're old-fashioned. CE, Common Era, is what your children and grandchildren are being taught how to mark history now. Anno Domini, AD, academics don't like to use that because it's too Christian. The year of our Lord. So they use CE, the Common Era. It's the same exact thing. I'd like to take you back to the 1st century and let you know that right along here, the Great Rift Valley, the deepest cut in the planet. And this is where, here's the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. This is where we know that a civilization starts in Africa, but first cities, first written language, first taxes, the first census, all of those things happen in this area right here. Would you come back with me to 4 places quickly? You know them. You know these 4 places. Everybody has them. That's my goal for today. The first one is a little town on this peninsula-looking thing, south of the Black Sea, north and west of the Mediterranean, and it's called Anatolia. Turkish tribes came way later, so let's call it Anatolia. Latin writers called it Asia Minor. Asia's little brother. This strip of land right here. Everybody see it? Would it shock you to know that Paul was not born in Israel or Judea, which is where all the biblical action happens here? He was born in a little town called Tarsus. Paul is Anatolian. He is not natively Israeli. And he's born into a town, we believe, where his parents were given or purchased Roman citizenship. To be Roman was, in those days, is to be American, at least has been, till today. It was a privilege. It was an honor. It was something that once you were Roman, you could pass down. Not everyone got to be Roman outside of Rome. You had to earn it. You had to fight for it. You had to buy it or marry into it. And so we believe that Paul's mother and father somehow earned enough favor in this little town of Tarsus to become Roman. So Paul is Jewish by background. He's Anatolian by location. And he's Roman by nationality. And this is the first 10 minutes of his life. I don't know if there's anybody else in this room who could be American and live in Europe most of their lives and come back and speak different languages. I don't know anybody really that would be someone that is very global in scope. Have you ever met someone that's very global in scope? This is the Apostle Paul. Tarsus is one very important thing. There's a river, anything in history, there's either a river by it or there's a way to walk through it, which means you can tax it and carry stuff through, right? Robert Foss will tell you the only interesting thing about commerce is how to charge people from taking it this to there. So there's a nice river that comes right down and empties out. Tarsus sits by that river, and there's a big mountain pass. You guys are going to love this. It's called the Cilician Gates. To get up into the central part of Turkey, you had to go through these gates. Paul mentions them several times. They're quite forbidding to travel through. And the city at the foot of those gates is Tarsus. So Paul had literally people coming through from the time he was an infant, from all over the world going through this town. Paul was a veteran traveler by the time he was a young man. He was familiar with mountains, desert, water. He was truly, his background is as broad and experienced as anybody in an Outward Bound program could be today. This man was exposed in his childhood to every major world religion. He was exposed to Roman theater, Greek writing, Jewish teaching from the time he could, before he could speak, worshipped at synagogue. He was really amazingly international and broad. Everybody with me? This is where he's from. Famously, Antony and Cleopatra met in this town. Can you imagine how things have gone? Talk about staring at each other. Can you imagine how things have gone differently if they hadn't met? Oh, so boring. Alexander the Great comes through this town. Everybody came through this town. Tarsus. It's where he's from. What's the second town that we have on our list? Jerusalem. When I went to the Holy Land in 1989, I was told you make money in Tel Aviv, you can party in Eilat, the resort town, the southern town, right here at the top of the Red Sea. You can party in Eilat, but you pray in Jerusalem. Why do Orthodox Jewish boys lose their eyesight by the age of 10? Have you ever seen an Orthodox man that does not wear Coke bottle glasses? They're reading until 11 o'clock at night by candlelight every single night except about 8 nights of the year. Their glasses are ready because they will burn their eyes through. They're studying Mishnah, Talmud, and Torah. Paul went to Jerusalem to study. Now, Jerusalem looms large for us, but in the great scheme of things, Jerusalem was a college town. It was not amongst the great sinners of the world, except for the Jewish people. It certainly is today, but not back then. Paul went to Jerusalem to study. He studied under Rabbi Gamaliel, who is identified broadly as the greatest rabbi in the first third of the first century. Every generation had its all-star rabbi. Any short Jewish history, you just need to find out who the leading rabbi is, and they will tell you everything about that time. Gamaliel is it. He comes into prominence in 18 to 22 AD, somewhere in there, and he writes and teaches broadly. He is quoted, by the way, in the book of Acts, isn't he? He tells the Jewish council, look, why don't you let these guys, famously, why don't you let these Jewish men that are speaking about the resurrection of this guy named Jesus, why don't you let them go and let's see what happens? He makes a very interesting, Gamaliel does, argument. He says, if it's not of God, it will die immediately. But if it is of God, no force on earth will stop it, and you don't want to be contending against God. By the way, Gamaliel was the first Anglican Christian. That one moment has influenced Anglican or Episcopalian theology more than any other moment. Most Anglican theology says, let's just wait a bit. You know how the British are. Put on some tea, and let's have a chat, and let's see what happens for 50 years. I'm not joking. I'm being totally serious. So Paul goes to study under the greatest rabbi of the first century to that time. How many men do you think from all over the Roman Empire got to do that? Not very many. Paul is identified early on as being a brilliant, capable student. This is not Peter the fisherman. This is the young man who's getting universities calling him at home when he is a teenager. I need to tell you, there are some parents in the room. Friday night, I'm not joking, for the first time, we got emails addressed not to us, but to our daughter. Horrifying. Horrifying, because there are several schools really interested to talk to my kid, except they don't tell you how much that costs. And I know the deal, right? We're going to pay for the privilege of these schools talking to our kids. Haven't you all been through that? Yeah, someone can take me out for counseling later. Anyway, imagine in the first century with no email, Paul being identified in this town. To come to Jerusalem, it's like going to Harvard or London or Washington to study in the Jewish world under this rabbi. Paul would have memorized the whole Psalter by the age of 9. He could sight read Hebrew and memorize large portions of Torah. That's before he arrived. And he would sit at the feet of Gamaliel and listen, as they did, in synagogues, which were not places of worship. The temple was for that. It was actually a place of teaching. The rabbis would stand and their disciples would sit around them. We found the steps where that's the case. And the rabbis would debate back and forth, standing, and their disciples would then have side debates. They were learning how to speak, how to teach, how to argue. And Paul sat with the greatest and brightest and best of his generation and was taught and was imprinted with the wisdom of Gamaliel. Everybody still with me? Anybody still awake? What's our third town? Damascus. Now, does everybody know how much Paul enjoyed Damascus? Didn't he love Damascus? Everybody knows, right?
He didn't see much of it.
I'm sorry, what was that?
He didn't see much of it.
How come he didn't see so much of it, Mark? What happened? Anybody know the story in the book of Acts? Saul is a young man who was present at the death of the first Christian martyr. His name is Stephen. And Paul, as a young rabbinical student, is holding the cloaks of the Jewish men that are about to stone Stephen to death. You couldn't throw well with your cloak on. Kind of, it stopped your movement. And so the men would properly take their cloaks off to have a good range of motion, and they would hurl that rock at the head and the innards and the privates of the person they were killing. Paul was the one holding the coats. He probably had Stephen's blood splattered on him. This is what Torah said to do with blasphemers. You didn't crucify them, that was Roman. A good traditional Jewish death, what do you have in the desert? You don't have trees, you have stones. If you can imagine how brutal it is to be crucified, can you imagine being stoned? Monty Python's turned it into a joke, and I laughed as well until I actually thought about what that might actually be like. I don't laugh so much anymore. And so Paul is introduced to us as Saul, holding the cloaks of the men as Stephen is dying. And as Stephen is dying, what's he doing? Does anybody recall? The first martyr? He's praising God and he's forgiving the people that are killing him, just like Jesus did. That's Paul's first introduction. There is no knowledge that we have from the book of Acts or the letters of Paul, the two primary sources, that Jesus and Paul ever met. They were in the same city, maybe at the same time, but we do not know that they physically met each other face to face. And they probably would not have.
Oh, God.
Oh. You all right?
Fine. No worries.
Okay. I know
Cold
it.
body.
I know it.
Anxiety.
I was going to say, kind of the stoning part gets people kind of jazzed up. Oh, here. Sorry. Thank you.
Who is Stephen again?
Stephen is the name of the first Christian martyr.
Okay.
He was a young man who was a disciple. He was a follower of Jesus. He was Jewish. And he's confronted by the... he goes to speak. It's in the book of Acts. You can read it. And by the way, I want to have you all read and study. To get into the Bible, Mark said to stare a little bit, to crack the book of Acts. Stephen gives a speech to the Jewish Sanhedrin in which he shares with them about the witness of Jesus, and they're so offended they put him to death. Spontaneously, just like that.
Uh-huh. They're not like the British. Let's talk about it.
No. By the way, has anybody ever seen an execution? I've talked to many people that have. I'm from Florida. They execute people all the time there. They have nightmares. They can't drive. They drink. People that actually witness executions, many of them need counseling. It's a very kind of brutal thing to see. This was Paul as a young man.
Oh, wow.
Paul then becomes convinced.
So how young?
How young? I have to look at my primary source. By the way, Steve has a version of this book that is more for people that aren't academic grew up with no friends and had to read a lot like me. Paul, A Critical Life by Jerome Murphy O'Connor. I find this to be a fascinating book. He has a chronology, I'm going to guess early 20s. In that very impressionable time of life, Paul becomes convinced that, Saul becomes convinced that this movement within Judaism is actually a threat. And he is going to start to extinguish it. So he starts to go out in Jerusalem and seek out Jewish believers in Jesus and bring them before the Sanhedrin like Stephen. So Paul was so zealous. In fact, that's where you get the word, right? Do you know the Greek word zelotes? Were people that were so excitable and excited about their faith that they were willing to kill somebody else. The zelotes, one of Jesus' disciples, is called the zealot. The zelotes had long knives. They'd hide them in the folds of their cloak so that you walk through the crowd, you walk by somebody, you could just pull the knife out and kill them. And no one would ever know you were there. So this young man becomes so convinced that Judaism, the Judaism he loves, the Judaism that he's come to Jerusalem to study, is under threat by this movement, that he starts to go into people's homes and pull them out, men and women, dragging them physically up before the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, the religious council, basically the governing body of Judaism. This is how Paul started out. And he did this for a while. No one ever remembers that. So the book of Acts tells us that he was headed to Damascus because he was cleansing Jerusalem and he had heard that some believers in Jesus were spreading out, and he was going to Damascus to do the very same thing there. And we know from evidence that they knew he was coming. And this is the star pupil of the star rabbi. Everybody knows who he is in the Jewish community. Everybody remember what happened? On the road to Damascus? He gets knocked off the horse, right? No, there's no horse. No, he gets knocked flat on his butt. The word is a little stronger in the Greek. He gets knocked flat on his butt, and he's completely blinded, and he has a first-person experience, just like Peter, James, and John at the Mount of the Transfiguration. Does everybody remember? It's a beautiful moment. He does not just hear a voice. He actually sees. He says, as he neared Damascus, Acts chapter 9, he went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if any were found there who belonged to the way, capital W, this is the name for before they were called Christians, followers of the way, whether man or woman, Saul might take them as prisoners back to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why are you killing me? Saul says, who are you, Lord? And the voice says, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but didn't see anybody. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. He was completely blinded. They led him by the hand into Damascus. He does get to Damascus, just not how he thought. For 3 days he was blind, and he fasted. He did not eat or drink anything. He knew something life-changing had just happened. And then he's healed by an older man who is a believer named Ananias, who God sends to Saul. Damascus is a life-changing experience. They call it the conversion. I would say it's the death of this young man. And the rebirth of someone new, whom ultimately he will name Paul. He actually changes, in good Old Testament fashion, changes his name from Saul to Paul. And so he arrives at Damascus, but he is not the brilliant young student of the leading rabbi as the zealot. He arrives being led by the hand because he cannot see. It's a crushing moment. Again, I'll ask, have you ever been with anybody that's been struck blind? It's terrifying. I actually have been with somebody, and it's terrifying. The last city, Damascus, I'm sorry, Jerusalem down here, right along the Great Rift Valley, right along the major trade routes here between Africa and Asia. It's up in the hill country, the Shephelah, just above the Shephelah, coming off the Sea of the Mediterranean. Actually, has anybody ever been to Jerusalem? Some of you have been to Jerusalem, haven't you? Yeah. Okay. It's like a boiling pot. You know, you put the pot on with water and you let it boil, and it starts to... Jerusalem's like that all the time. And if you live there long enough, you start to be like that too. Absolutely. You can feel Jerusalem. It's a physical force. It's not just a geography. Here's Damascus, just a little bit up in this territory of Syria. I've never been. It's not good for Americans to go. They don't fancy that somehow. The State Department doesn't like it, and neither do they. Of course, you wouldn't go now. Damascus, one of the oldest inhabited cities in the entire world. They've been there a very long time. They're going to be there for a long time. Again, on a major trade route. So Paul's going up to this major town. He arrives in different condition. Let's take you to the very last city. And it's one of the most important for Christians, and they have no idea it's there. It's right here, near the very top of this turn on the Mediterranean. And it was called Antioch. It's not just a joke by Monty Python. Antioch is one of the leading cities of the ancient world. It's been almost totally destroyed by crusades and earthquakes. I wanted to go to Antioch. My wife begged me not to go. It's in a strip of land today that Turkey still has. There was a kingdom there, an ancient kingdom called Hatay, and the kingdom voted to join with Turkey, the modern state of Turkey, in 1917 or 18. No, 1923, excuse me. It was after the Great War. And so Turkey's right here, and Turkey juts down to claim an 11-mile-long strip of land that ends with Antioch. It's called Antakya today in Turkish. The reason my wife didn't want me to go is because all the refugees from the Syrian conflict, the civil war in Syria, are streaming across the border. There were 350,000 last year, refugees, and they all came across at Antioch. There was also, the chemical weapons were up here, and evidently there was some evidence they were targeting clerics, Christian clerics in Antioch. So my wife asked perhaps it would be a good idea if I did not, for our marriage, go to Antioch. I'd like to someday go. Has anybody ever been to Antioch? Oh, it's one of the great cities of antiquity. It's here that Paul ends up. And he ends up there because outside of Jerusalem, the most important Christian city is here. This is the place where Christians started to be called Christian. It's the place where Gentiles started to become Christian. It's a great library, second only to Ephesus and Alexandria. It's third after Alexandria. Over 200,000 scrolls in the library in Antioch. Paul ends up there to be retrained, not as a rabbi, but to start to study what this thing is called Christianity. Who is Jesus? He stares at Jesus for a while before he gets involved in his ministry. And this is where his life purpose is determined. Everybody awake? Anybody awake? Okay. Kickoff in 54 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, 54 minutes.
All of this before you get a whole lot of knacks, all of this before you read a letter of Paul, By the way, Romans to Philemon, the largest correspondence in the New Testament, organized by size, not by chronology. Don't let it confuse you. Romans is the longest letter. Philemon is the shortest. So you need a good study Bible for that. Why am I telling you all of this about Paul? Why would I take you over to the Middle East? Where are you from? Where are you from? I had one of my best friends visit South Tampa, Florida. And he drove with his wife through the neighborhood where I was born and raised. He was shocked. I had never told him about the neighborhood in which I was born. I was born and raised in a neighborhood about 3/4 of a mile from MacDill Air Force Base. And those Air Force guys have been drinking and partying and marrying women, local women, and raising families for probably 50 years. It's a little more rough and tumble than my friend ever knew. So he drives through my neighborhood and he calls me and he says, "This is where you're from?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "What in the hell are you doing in Vail?" And I said, "It's interesting that that's where you're from, but that doesn't mean that's where you need to be." I was from a place where the beach was really close, and young people didn't get in trouble on mountains, they got in trouble on beaches. At night was our favorite time to get into trouble. Staring and falling in love and dating, beaches were just fine. I was raised in a location where most people actually did not go to college. They went into the military, they went into construction, they went into the grocery business, plumbing, whatever. I was raised in a place where there had to be adult lockup of our baseball bats at our field of baseball, because if the baseball bats were let out, like up in North Tampa at the Nice Baseball League for kids, you know, they put all the bats, the baseballs and the bats out for practice. If you did that in South Tampa, they would disappear and be used against you at the end of the practice. The adults kept the bats because you didn't leave them out. So I'm from a place where we drag race over bridges because it was fun when you're 16 to drive 125 miles an hour. Where are you from? Everybody's from somewhere. And where you're from is an essential part of who you are in your story. And listening to your life.
Bueno, sí.
Do we turn that?
That just turn it off in this room.
That one to the left?
The one with the knob. Or
Yeah.
push it.
Let's try that.
Or push it in if the light goes off.
Real quick. Karen, where are you from?
Detroit.
Detroit. Am I talking? Do you remember stories?
I'm listening.
When you, yeah? Yep. Susan, where are you from?
Massachusetts.
Mary, where are you from?
Small village. England.
In England. Yep. Let's see. Dana, where are you from?
A little farming community in California.
In California. Arlen, where are you from?
Champaign, Illinois.
Illinois. Robert?
Beautiful downtown Del Rio, Texas.
Everybody knows where you're from. Robert, why am I even asking that question? Suzanne, where are you from?
Las Vegas, Nevada.
You're the nicest person I've ever met.
I was there for a little while.
Okay. Isn't it interesting to kind of go back to where you're from and learn about, why there? What did I learn? How was I shaped and formed? What did God do? Why are we not there now? Everyone's from somewhere. And it really is so interesting to go back and look at that. Where'd you school? Where'd you go to college? Or trade school? Or military training? It's different for everybody. Do you remember those years? So funny that as an adult, I have a hard time remembering those years because they were so different. You start to lose the memory right about the time your kid starts to go to college, and you tell them, please don't do this and that and this and this and that, which is exactly what I did. I was a freshman at Florida State University in Tallahassee. There were 16 rapes inside my dorm the first semester. We had fisticuffs in my dorm every Friday night. My entire first semester, and we'll edit this out of the tape. My roommate, my first semester from Altamont Springs, Florida, drank a case of beer every single night for 3 months. A case of beer every single night for 3 months. Would it surprise you to learn I had a different roommate by this, my second semester? I would wake up in the morning with people that were not in my room when I went to bed the night before. So some of whom wanted to sleep close to me. Men and women, the party was in our room. I don't know how I made a grade at Florida State. Literally, one of the reasons why I'm ordained, I believe, is because of that year at Florida State. My mother visited one time, and she was so horrified she never visited again. The whole season. I'd walk over people in the lobby to go to church on Sunday mornings because they had passed out. Now this is in the early 1980s, but friends, true story. I went back to University of South Florida, had a job and a girlfriend and a place to live. And that was all pretty good with me. I graduated at the University of South Florida. Anybody remember where you schooled? Anybody remember those years? Where'd you guys school?
Roanoke College in Virginia.
In Virginia. Was it wild?
It was. But in a gentlemanly way.
In a gentlemanly way.
Okay, you'll be in trouble afterwards, but the camera's not good. All right, let's see. Brent, Judy, where did you?
I went to Indiana State University.
Larry Bird.
Larry Bird.
I think most interesting is our oldest long-haired free Tibet son who went to college and studied in Amman, Jordan, and went to all of these places, including Syria and Antioch, and all of a sudden came back and wanted to join the military and understood what a punk he was and said, I'd never realized what we have and what it takes to have that.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting?
And he walked all those places.
And he went to all these places, sure. Dick, where'd you go to college?
Michigan State University, home of the Spartans.
And you ran people's legs off, right? All right. Barbie, where'd you go to college?
I went to 1 year to Oxford College and Lutheran College and then the University of Minnesota.
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 Okay. Minnesota.
Minnesota. You guys sure you betcha.
Okay. Does everybody remember those years, those professors, the people that you studied, people that you studied with? Remember those formative years. It's so interesting to watch other people go through those years, but those years, psychologists tell us, are very critical in who we are. My folks were separated. I got the news on a payphone at my dorm, my 6th week of college. Lost my best friend in a car accident. He was killed at Boston College, my freshman semester. These are things that just imprint upon us. I look at our college students when they come and go, and they have stories and stories that they're never going to tell me. And I tell them the same thing, which is, welcome home, we missed you. And your spiritual home is right here. And we're so excited to have you back. I know I won't hear all those stories. Their parents aren't going to hear all those stories, thank God. But this is such a formative time, just like in Paul's life. Think back to your college years, if you can remember them. Think back to those times. Military academies, military service, all the same kind of formative time. This is what's going on in Paul's life. What town or place or moment in your life did God meet you and totally undo you? Is there a moment in life where you literally died and were reborn? Everybody, I'm going to argue, has a Damascus. Everybody has, this was the plan. I'm on the plan. I'm going to Damascus. I know who I am. I know what I'm supposed to do. And on the road. Blinded, hobbled, shattered, destroyed. Everybody has a Damascus. Some of us have more than one Damascus. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. Don't have to raise your hands. But God is in the business. I tell people about death and resurrection. It wasn't that Saul spruced himself up. The old Saul died on that road. He was literally blinded and he knew it. And when he was given sight, there was someone new there. Someone that God could actually speak to and lead and use. Is there a death and resurrection in your life? I preach to you about mine all the time. You don't need to hear mine today. For many of us, there is that moment when God said, not this life, that life. And it is a brand new world. I've had several people say to me, I want to go to your church because I need to be better. And I said, my God, if you need to be better, don't come to our church. Go to the Rotary Club, right? Go play golf in Cordier. If you want to be better, ski. I said, our church doesn't make good people better. God makes broken people whole. We're a spiritual mash unit. God goes, and we send them right back out. That's what our church is. Where's your Damascus? Who were you before? Who are you now? This is just a beautiful way to use Paul to reflect. He was younger when this happened. Some of us aren't. But there generally is that moment when life is just never the same again. And I'm going to argue that God can literally bring resurrection out of death and transform us. Where's your Antioch? Where's the place where you really got your life purpose? When did you know why you're here? Can I tell you, friends, in my 19th year, I think I know where my Antioch is. It wasn't in the plan. I was going to be here 2 years and go on to doctoral school in biblical studies, Old Testament. I could sight read Hebrew. I'd been to Jerusalem. I'd walked in Egypt, just like, and that was my life. I was just going to go get a PhD and teach that and maybe preach every once in a while. And, just 2 years. There was an older priest, Father Bruce. He needed a younger guy. I'm going to start a little something in Edwards. We met at the basement of the bank. They got kicked out. The basement of the bank in the corner of Edwards. My first Sunday in 1995, we're at the dance studio. I'm preaching and I'm looking at myself in the mirror with a bar. It was kind of disconcerting. I felt like putting my leg up on it. We got kicked out of there because there were people living above us. We were singing too loud. So we got kicked out of like 4 places in Edwards before we even found the Edwards Elementary School. You remember that, Trina, don't you? You remember that school?
Yeah.
You remember that dance studio? Yeah. 40 chairs in and out every Sunday. Everything in and out. Bob Norris lifted those chairs for months and years. Years and years. Vail's my Antioch. I wasn't supposed to go get a PhD. This church is my PhD. Everything I'm proud about other than my kids is right here. I say to people, if you want to know about our church, just come. That's all you got to do is just come. So you're my degree. I mean, everything about this ministry, interfaith, this is what God's called me to. This is what I'm proudest of. This is Antioch for me. I didn't get that. I didn't know. Average length of stay in the Episcopal Church for clerics, do you know? Less than 4 years. I wouldn't know Patrick's name. It took me 2 years to get Patrick's name. Or to know that you guys have a son here, or whatever it is. Mark, how long were you at your cures?
It's usually 8 to 10 years.
Didn't that blow away the average Lutheran stay, right?
Yeah, it's twice as long as most.
No one ever told me that you could stay somewhere and watch a whole generation grow. and see God at work. That's amazing. I had 2 kids here. I mean, this is Antioch for me. This is the base. I'm a Vailite now. I visit Denver, and then I leave Denver, and I'm really happy to do that. You know? Where's your Antioch? Where's the place that really, for your adult life, has formed and shaped? Is it here? Is it in Vail here?
Yeah.
Where's that place for you that God said, now let's kind of work together here? Not just date. Mark talked about dating. This can be a long-term thing here. Why don't you put down some roots here? Let's us spend a little time here. Where's your Antioch? Have you found it yet? Not everybody has. The place where God says, we're just going to do a spell together, right here. And why don't you just get comfortable? Because we're going to spend us some time together. Listen to my Southern. Every time I talk about this, I go Southern. We're going to spend us some time together. You know. Can I close by saying I'm going to tell you next week, and let me just stop for a second and ask Brent to, if we could conclude the teaching. Thank you very, very much, Brent.